Next, I'd like to invite up Geordie Rose, founder and chief technology officer of D-Wave. Dr. Rose holds a PhD in theoretical physics from the University of British Columbia, specializing, hold yours here, quantum effects in materials. He is known as a leading advocate for quantum computing and physics-based processor design. He's been covered in MIT Technology Review Magazine, The Economist, New Scientist, Scientific American. For those of you that are UFC fans in the room, he is also a two-time Canadian national wrestling champion, a member of the McMaster Sports Hall of Fame, and a 2010 NAGA World Championships gold medalist in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love that part. Paul, I don't know how we're going to beat that. I'd like to also introduce Paul Lee, Managing General Partner at Van Edge Capital. Paul is been a venture capital fund focusing on interactive digital media space. Paul is a former president of Electronic Arts Incorporated. He's an active angel in D-Wave, Bycast, ALI Technologies, Blast Radius, Pacific Bioenergy, extremely active in the community, sits on the Dean's Advisory Council at the Sauder School of Business at UBC, the Vancouver Board of Trade, Premier's Technology Council. He's the chair of DigiBC. Really happy to have you here as well, Paul. Thanks for coming. Now, Geordie, you got a slide presentation here. I'm going to get rolling. Do you want to stand at the podium and go through the slide presentation?
Why don't we do that?
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, hi, everybody. So I'm going to do the bulk of the presentation, and Paul is going to take over at the end. So D-Wave is a very unusual company, and this is going to be a little bit of an unusual presentation. But I'm going to talk to you about how we raised $100 million for this particular idea. We were trying to determine exactly what the number was before the presentation. It's actually almost exactly $100 million now. And this money has come from some of the biggest investment groups in the world, including Draper Fisher Jurvetson, Goldman Sachs, large U.S. defense contractor, and some other things, some other high-profile funds. So when I first started doing this and putting this together, I put together this list of, the top 5 things you need to know. And of course, no one ever remembers anything from these presentations. So what I thought I'd do is I'd boil it down to one key message that I think is very important for any kind of business relationship. So I'm going to be talking about raising money, but some of the financing groups that we've talked to are actually strategic investors. So this has to do with talking to customers and basically any interaction you have with anybody as a business leader. Is that the number one thing that I've found over the last 11 years or so of doing this is that you absolutely have to understand who you're talking to and what they want. And this is not something that you can put off after to the end when you're thinking about how to deal with somebody. You really have to get into somebody's head at a fundamental level. So what I wanted to do is talk about Paul, because he's right here. It's supposed to be a little confrontational, So I'm gonna try to get into Paul's head here, and maybe you can do this too as you sit there. Now, many of you know Paul. So imagine you're Paul, and you've got your venture fund, and what's your day like? So you've got a bunch of people telling you different things about the wonderful companies that they're starting up. But like all investors, what you end up seeing is a lot of really boring deals. So just because they're boring doesn't mean that they're bad investments. So for example, how many of you know about Farmville? Okay. So Farmville is the most played game in the history of computer games. There are something like 65 million active players, and it's a farm simulation game. Now, I don't know about you guys, but there's very little that I can imagine that's more boring than simulating a farm. I'm sorry, I just don't understand it. So a lot of the deals that you see end up being boring. I'll give you another example from my world. The top 500 fastest supercomputers in the world, there isn't a single one that has a chip in them that you can't buy at Best Buy. So the world has become somewhat homogeneous. Everything is sort of the same. You see the same thing day in and day out. Now, every once in a while, something comes by as an investor or a business person that is the greatest thing you've ever seen, and it's that nugget of gold that you were looking for. And so you, as the pitcher, has to understand what it is about the person you're talking to that's going to be that nugget of gold. And they're going to look at it and they're going to say, I have been waiting my whole life to see this thing. So when I was doing the research for this, I found one that if I was an investor, I would react this way. Doggles. Now imagine somebody came into your office and pitched you. It's dog goggles. Amazing. So I made up a little montage of how I felt this would go if this was pitched to John Doerr, who, he's a Kleiner Perkins guy. This didn't actually happen, but I laugh every time I see that dog in the goggles. But seriously, so, Doggles, that's a great idea. And it actually is true. You can go to doggles.com and order goggles for your dog. So as an investor or anybody, I thought this was a kind of a pithy quote, is that investors and everybody is kind of like that guy panning for gold. They're sifting through an awful lot of chaff looking for that special thing. And investors tend to do a lot of waiting and hoping. And I think that some people, not just investors, forget why they got into it in the first place. In technology, and particularly the field I'm in, many of the people who grew up as scientists watched Star Trek and things like this. And when they were kids, they wanted phasers and beam me up and all of this. And you get older and you get cynical and you forgot why you got into it in the first place. But it's still there in the background. Now imagine you're an investor and this guy walks into your office and he says, I'm going to sequence the human DNA molecule. I'm going to be the first to do it. I'm going to do it for a tenth what they say it's going to cost, and I'm going to do it in a third the time. That's the kind of message that as an entrepreneur, you bring into an investor, and that's the kind of thing that's going to say, the guy that you're talking to is going to say, that is exactly what I was waiting to hear. In my whole career, I wanted that guy to walk into my office and say, I am going to create artificial life. Now, that doesn't happen every day, and you might think, how many creations of artificial life are there? But if you think about it, there are an awful lot of marvelous things that are waiting to be discovered out there. And they're not a little bit different than what's out there now. They're a lot different. So I'll give you an example. This is a mock-up of a star system that's not too far from where we are, where a bunch of planets have been discovered that circle around that particular star. And that little blue band there is the livable zone, where the conditions are likely to have liquid water. And those planets in the middle there are Earth-like. And if you do the numbers, you could actually get there in a fairly short period of time. Now imagine you're an investor and someone comes in and says, I've got this startup idea. I am going to go to this planet. Now, of course, it's ludicrous, right? You think, how much is that going to cost? Is that really realistic? But that's kind of the message I'm trying to drive home here. I'm putting it a little bit over the top. But you want to make your business, your plan, somehow distinct from everything else. And one of the ways to do it, and the way that D-Wave did it, is you come up with an idea that is so profoundly different and world-changing from what you've seen before that they really don't have any choice. They have to invest. It's the one thing that they're never going to get another chance to see anything like this. If they don't act now, they're never going to see it again. On this idea of whether this is practical, so we did it. In some ways, there's very little things that are more difficult to build than what we've built. And the logistics of this, there are portions of funds put aside for things that a partner can love. And the partner can say, I don't now need to talk to my other partners, I'm going to do this. And it's usually a very small percentage of a fund, but if you've got $1 billion fund and it's 5%, it's a start. So you can start making inroads into those big money. So this is Steve Jurvetson. He represents our single largest investor, and there he is sitting next to one of our machines. And he's an example of this type of investor that I'm talking about. So he's an investor in SpaceX, Tesla, which makes the electric cars, Synthetic Genomics, Craig Venter's new company, D-Wave. And those are the only boards he sits on. So he sits on 4 boards. We're one of those. And so that gives you an idea about the kind of things that he loves. Why is this such a big idea? I don't have the time to go into it in any great detail, but this is a nice little flavoring of why this sort of thing that we're building is interesting to people. It's because it harnesses nature in a way that it's never been harnessed before, and it uses insights from advanced physics that are not they're not yet part of the current, cultural understanding of science. This idea of parallel universes seems like somehow science fiction-y, but it's embedded in the bedrock of our most powerful theory of nature. And so what a quantum computer does is it exploits the fact that these things actually exist in the real world, and it uses them to perform computations. And some things that these things can do are outside of the scope of what you can do with any conventional computer, no matter how big you make it. You can make a computer as big as the moon made out of the smallest transistors that you could possibly imagine ever building, and there are things that thing can't compute that I can compute on one chip that's the size of my thumbnail using these new techniques. And of course, John McCain loves it too, because him and Sarah Palin are, once they work out the physics, can win an election in a parallel universe. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jordy.